May 2000, Lafayette, Louisiana. A mother awakens to hear the screams of her 2-year-old son.
He was laying on his back, and he was kicking his feet up like this and pounding his fists like this, just kicking and screaming at the top of his lungs.
Andrea Leininger cannot soothe her baby James. Eventually, he falls back to sleep. She thinks the nightmare is over, but really, it is just beginning.
Then the next night, he had another one, and it was the exact same thing, the same exact kicking motion. And the more he had it, the more bizarre it became because it was so specific and so repetitive.
This marked the start of one of the best documented cases of possible reincarnation in history. Today, James Leininger is 12.
I play sports, baseball, soccer, go to Ascension Episcopal School. I have a lot of friends there. The other kids, when they were younger, say, I want to be a fireman, I want to be an astronaut, but I was always, I want to be a fighter pilot. I want to be in the Marines.
Oh, you got your school pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, they came out nice.
From the age of 3, James's parents began to hear stories from their son that shocked them. That their son was recalling things that connected him to a Navy pilot who died in 1945. They were skeptical. Bruce is an HR manager in the oil industry. Andrea is a former ballerina turned instructor. As Christians, they never believed in reincarnation, but they began to piece together an amazing story. The first clue came from the terrifying, non-stop nightmares that James began having at the age of 2.
He was saying, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. That's when I was like, oh my God, is that what he's been dreaming this entire time?
What he was saying wasn't registering as much on me as what he was doing. He was flailing around in bed. And I remember the very specific thought I had at that point. This looks like The Exorcist. He was freaking out. I had this thought, is he possessed? What is going on here?
Within a year, the visions that greeted James in his nightmares began taking shape when he was wide awake.
I was reading to James, and then he sat up and he goes, Mama, the little man's going like this. And he laid down, and he goes, and he did the same thing he did in his dream. He was kicking his feet up, and he goes, the little man's going like this. Ooh, 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 can't get out, can't get out. And I sat him back up, and I said, who's the little man? And he goes, me. It still makes my hair stand up. And Bruce said, what happened to your plane? And he said, it crashed on fire. And he said, why did your airplane crash? And he said, it got shot. And Bruce said, who shot your plane? And he went, ugh, the Japanese.
James then gave his parents the next uncanny clue, one that was very specific, the name of a ship from which he says his aircraft took off.
So I said, well, did your boat have a name? And he said, Natoma. And I'd never heard the word before. And I went down the hall and got onto the computer and Googled it. And down around hit 300, all there was this thing, Natoma Bay CVE 62. Clicked on it, and up comes this history of a World War II aircraft carrier. And so that was the beginning of what the heck is going on here.
Standing there staring at this picture of this little, it was like an aerial photo of this little aircraft carrier in the water, and we just stood there staring at it for a long time.
I had no answers. You know, how could he know this? How could he know a person? How could he know a ship? And what did all this mean? So that was where I really just said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know what I'm going to find, but I'm not going to stop looking until I get as many answers as I can get.
This was enough to send Bruce on an investigation, doing his own research. Over the next 2 years, he learned about the men from the Natoma Bay, both living and dead. And James kept giving his parents additional, tantalizing, eerie clues.
Well, I kept asking him, do you remember what your name was? Do you remember what your name was? And he always said James. And I thought, well, he's 2, he's confused. He thinks I'm asking him what his name is.
Then James started drawing.
That was one of my mission things.
The mission thing, you remember that?
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite ones. 'Cause it's
The same thing over and over, like a movie compressed all into one frame. An air battle, flak, a plane on fire, and his signature, James 3.
So one day I was in the kitchen, I was washing dishes, James had breakfast, and he had an airplane, he was just flying around like this, and he goes, Mama, before I was born, I was a pilot, and my airplane got shot in the engine and crashed in the water, and that's how I died. And I was just froze. It was such a bizarre thing to say, but it was just that matter of fact. There was no drama, there was no emotion to it.
At 3, James started pretending to be a pilot, with an attention to detail that astonished his father.
One day he dragged a car seat into the closet in my office, and he set up a little cockpit in there. He had a little play school console, and like it was going to be a cockpit, you know, and he's going back and forth. All of a sudden, the door comes flying open, and he comes rolling out of it. I said, James, what happened to you? He says, I said, did you fall? He says, no. He says, my plane got shot, and I bailed out.
The next breakthrough came when Bruce was invited to the Natoma Bay Veterans Reunion. He asked about the names of men killed in battle, and this led him to finally solving the mystery of James 3.
He called me on the phone and he said, you won't believe this, there's only one guy from Natoma Bay who was killed during the battle for Iwo Jima, and his name was James M. Houston Jr. And I said, wait, that would make our James 3. I was so excited. I'm like, that's it. I'm like, that's him. It's James M. Houston. His name is James. It's James 3.
James Houston Jr., World War II Navy pilot. At age 21, on March 3, 1945, his plane was shot down over Chichijima. Now, the skeptical parents were sitting on compelling proof that their little boy really was reincarnated. Louisiana boy James Leininger spent his childhood recounting memories of being a World War II Navy pilot. Memories of a past life his parents could no longer ignore. From the age of 2 to 6, James continued to provide pieces of evidence of the incredible possibility that he was James Houston, reincarnated.
This plane, the Wildcat, is the plane that James M. Houston crashed in. And he was a test pilot for the Corsair. And he would test fly those off of carriers. The F-18 is the plane I want to fly when I grow up.
Since he was 2, James showed an unusual fascination for military air shows and an uncanny familiarity with vintage aircraft. His parents cautiously made contact with James Houston's only surviving relative, his sister, Anne. At first, she didn't know what to think about the little boy who claimed to be her brother, reincarnated. But then, James asked her for a painting that only one person other than her knew existed.
She sent this January 16th, 2006. Says, Dear James, I do hope that this is the picture you asked for. It is the only one of me done by my mother. I am sorry to be so long sending it to you. These past few weeks have been very busy and hectic. I hope you like it. With my love, Annie.
James believed then, as he does now, that it was the dead pilot's soul asking for that picture.
I had asked her for a painting that my past mother had done for her and me. This was in her attic for 50 or so years. My parents and she thought it was crazy that I would know about something like this.
Anne, too, became a believer. And there were other, more chilling connections. James had 3 G.I. Joes he named Billy, Walter, and Leon, names his parents thought were strange for a boy to choose.
Bruce is like, hey, James, what are you going to name your G.I. Joe? And he's just playing, he goes, Walter. And so we were like, Walter? Bruce goes, how come you named your G.I. Joes Billy, Walter, and Leon? And he goes, because that's who met me when I got to heaven. And it was one of those moments where like the blood drained out of our face, and we just kind of walked backwards. Bruce went in the office, I went in the office, we closed the door. He's in there going through papers like this. I'm like, what are you looking for? What are you looking for? He finds this piece of paper, and he says, Billy Peeler, Walter Devlin, and Leon Connor were all in the same squadron as James Houston. I was like, when did they die? Did they die before? He's throwing papers around, pulls out another sheet, and he looked at the dates of death, and they all died before James Houston died.
They all flew with him.
Although James's dad remained skeptical that reincarnation might really be possible, what happened next was uncanny.
So we're cleaning up the yard. He's playing in the leaves. I said, I just love you to bits. And he goes, well, he said, I knew you'd be a good daddy when I picked you. And I said, what? And he said, well, when I found you and Mommy, I knew you would be good parents. My head was shrinking to the size of a raisin, you know, my brain. I said, what do you mean when you found us? He said, well, I found you and Mommy in Hawaii.
James told his father that he saw them in a pink hotel, which is where the Leiningers were staying when they decided to have James. Bruce and Andrea were cautious about asking doctors and psychiatrists for help. They decided to find their own solution to James's ordeal. And their solution was to go to Japan, to the very expansive ocean where the pilot, James Houston Jr., died.
Thou who art the pilot of the souls of men.
The boat was right above where the wreckage of the plane was. And Bruce did this beautiful memorial service. And so I thought that was a perfect moment for me to just say, I sat down with him and I said, Jim Houston's been a part of your life for as long as we can remember. And he's always going to be an important part of who you are. But you have a life to live as James Leininger. And it's time for you to say goodbye to Jim Houston. And he just started bawling. And he cried for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, he had everyone on the boat.
It was the saddest thing I ever seen.
He had everyone on the boat.
Crying. It's time for us to say goodbye to James Houston.
Goodbye, James and Houston.
Good job.
I salute you.
Good boy. You're so brave. You're such a brave soul. Such a brave soul and spirit.
It was weird when we got back to shore. It was something had changed.
He left something there.
He really did. It was palpable. You could see that he'd mourned that and everything that had happened and was ready to move on. And he really did at that point. That's kind of when everything really changed.
I'm going to be the same thing that James M. Houston was, a pilot.
The next picture that James Leininger drew was one of peace. The nightmares stopped. The memories started to fade.
I don't want him to remember anything about his past life. He has a life, and I don't want him to be bogged down or confused or...
He's our son, he's not Jim Houston.
Got a life to live.
Today, James Leininger can remember nothing specific about the soul that used to torment him. At 12, he is an ordinary boy whose bedroom says something about who he is and who he believes he once was.
I'm in a Boy Scouts. I'm a first-class scout in the Boy Scouts. These are the books I got from Chichijima. Yearbooks, BB gun, my money bag, my phone. I don't know when I got this, but this is my grandmother's rosary and my Star Wars stuff and Blue Angels.
He doesn't talk much about his past life memories with his friends, but he doesn't hide it either if classmates stumble across a story on the internet. To James, reincarnation is a fact of his existence. It's part of his soul.
I believe that the spirit that I used to have when I was 4, 5, 6 has gone away. I'm just James now. It's not... I still have James Houston in me, I think, but it's not so much the bad history. It's more of the peaceful history of his life. Instead of the crashing of the plane, his death. I don't really think about my story so much. I just don't really talk about it. People ask me a question about it, I'll answer it.
How's it going, guys? As you can see from that video, there is a decent amount of proof that reincarnation exists. Not just this one case with James, but multiple other cases, especially in India, where it is a part of their belief structure that reincarnation actually does exist. However, in America, we do not typically believe in such a thing. It is a common saying, you only live once, which always makes me snicker a little bit because I do believe in reincarnation. Most people in America have Judeo-Christian beliefs, and they believe that whenever you die, you go to heaven or hell. I don't believe that's the case exactly. I think that this life, this world that we currently live in, is hell. After all, Jesus, as he was being tempted in the desert by the devil, was offered all the kingdoms of the world if he would just submit to the devil. How could the devil offer him all the kingdoms of the world unless they were already under his subjugation? It also said in the Bible by Jesus that the devil is the prince of this world. I believe that is in fact the case. We are currently living in hell. We have to suffer through hell in order to obtain heaven. And you only get to go to heaven once you obtain heaven on earth, because the kingdom of God is outside of you and it is inside of you. And once you obtain that mindset, that state of being that is completely filled with love, you, at the point of death, transcend the reincarnation process and rejoin the ineffable one in quote-unquote heaven. I think that people have lived multiple lifetimes and continue to live multiple lifetimes. This is a pretty common belief among the Gnostic Christians. It was said that, well, Jesus himself said that no one would taste death until his second coming. Of course, that's not true. People have died since Jesus was put upon the cross. However, I believe they were allowed to come back to try to get it right again, because no good God would send a man to hell for an infinite amount of time because of a single lifetime of sin or a single lifetime refusing to believe that Christ is the Messiah. I think that God would give us multiple chances to get it right, and that's exactly what's happened. It's also said in the Bible that John the Baptist has the spirit of Elijah within his body, meaning the reincarnation of Elijah. And a lot of people think that Jesus himself might be the reincarnation of Adam, possibly even Enoch from the book of Enoch. I don't know if this is the case or not, or if he's a higher being that came down into a fleshly body. But I do believe that he is the Son of God just as much as I believe that we are all children of God. Every person who has the Spirit of God within them since Adam breathed life, or since Adam was breathed life into by God. Whenever I had one of my mystical experiences, it was only a short while after that I started to have waking visions of past lives. At least this is what I believe they were. I've managed to put them in order to some extent, and after having these experiences, it was very clear what order they began in. And I think the first one was about 10,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more, in ancient China. I had a vision of being a rice farmer. I remember the region that I lived in. And I also remember I guess you could call it a scene from my lifetime, where I had a daughter. She had black hair. Obviously, she was Chinese. It was cut kind of like a Cleopatra-style haircut. And she was standing in the field up to her thighs in water. which is the method for planting rice. She was calling out to me, and I was too busy working to pay her any attention. I was ignoring her. And then finally something made me turn around, and I saw her naked as a jaybird, standing in the water, holding up a black snake, which I believe to be poisonous, by the neck, and it's trying to strike at her, and she has no idea that she's in any danger. She's just waving it around like it's a toy. And then the scene slows down, almost as if it turns into slow motion, and I go running towards her. I have a strong feeling that this is the reincarnation of one of my current daughters. I started to have this vision right before her birth. I don't know if that's the case or not, but my oldest daughter at the time said something very odd for a 5-year-old to say. She said that you only get to reincarnate on this planet if someone who is alive today remembers you, if there's a memory of you in the universal subconscious. I think that me having this memory from ancient China was what allowed my daughter to become born in another body, because my entire family was wiped out. I was shot in the back during that lifetime with an arrow, and I remember seeing my house on fire. Jump several thousand years into the future, I can remember a lifetime where I was the son of an Etruscan merchant who operated several ships. I spent the majority of that life, up until the point where I died, on a boat, specifically in the galley area of the boat, being taught by what seemed to be a hired professor. What triggered this memory of this lifetime was the phrase tabula rasa, blank slate. My professor would call me this because I would not pay attention to his instructions. I remember his whiteboard, for lack of a better word. It was a large tablet of rough-cut stone with a flat surface. And he would draw on this board with some kind of white, waxy, crayon-looking thing, and would wipe it off with a rough-looking wool-like eraser, which I've never seen anything like that, before or since, just in this vision. I remember staring out of the porthole in that boat and seeing the birds fly by, and whenever I saw the birds, the seagulls, I would know that I was close to seeing my father again, because we were getting close to the port, somewhere off what would be the left coast of Italy. As I progress in my lifetimes, I remember more of them. I can remember one lifetime where I was born as a twin. I had a twin sister, and I was a white man, living in America. I had an older brother who got sent off to World War I. I remember my mother making these little tiny cherry pies. They were about 4 inches across, and they were covered in powdered sugar. And I remember her saying that she was making them for the boys over there fighting. And she was sending them to my older brother, who eventually died in the war. My father worked in this mine, I think it was a coal mine, in West Virginia. He died whenever the mule that he used to pull the rail carts out of the mine kicked him in the head. We were a pretty poor family. I remember my mother sent me down the mountain to get a doctor, and he needed to cut a hole in my father's head because his brain was swelling, and my father ended up dying. I remember times were hard after that. And whether it was a year later or a few years later, I ended up dying of a fever at a very young age. In the previous lifetime that I can remember, the Etruscan lifetime, I died in a shipwreck whenever the seas became very stormy. I was an adolescent, probably no more than 10 or 11 years old. I remember another lifetime where I lived in, I think, Kentucky. My father was what would be called a snake oil salesman. He had a weird caravan type, I guess you would call it a wagon, but it had all these little boxes and cubby holes and shelves all over it with these various tonics, and he had fireworks for sale, and he was used to try to make it rain. He was a rainmaker. I remember they would take rattlesnakes and hang them from the fence line in order to try to make it rain, which I have since found out that that's actually a Native American tradition to try to anger the rain gods. I didn't realize this until after I had this vision. I remember my mother during that lifetime absolutely hating my father because he was wasting his life. He was barely making any money, and she thought he was, for lack of a better term, full of shit. It's odd whenever I piece these together because it appears that I reincarnate from east to west in a pattern, and that the more recent lifetimes I can remember more details from. And it appears all but the one lifetime where I was in China that I have been Caucasian and largely male, though I do have an impression that one lifetime I was a female. This is a interesting concept. I don't know if any religion explains this process, but there was definitely a progression of my spirit from east to west, like the progression of the sun. And I know it's uncommon for a Western person to have these memories, but apparently the word Buddha means one who remembers their past lifetimes, and I don't remember all of them by any means, or the entirety of those lifetimes, but I feel like bits and pieces of those lifetimes have been printed on my spirit. I think that human spirits are like brown dwarfs, like Jupiter or Saturn. Balls of hydrogen and helium that, instead of hydrogen and helium, they're balls of experience. Once those balls become dense enough with matter, once you obtain enough experience, those brown dwarfs collapse in on themselves and turn on fusion and shed a tremendous amount of their matter and turn into stars. I think this is the enlightenment process. This is the becoming a walking kingdom of heaven type experience where you become a light in this world. I think that the only way this is obtainable is through living multiple lifetimes, having multiple experiences, and multiple points of view. And I think that one day will come very soon where children are born with complete memory of their past lifetimes. This will be the gift of the new age of Aquarius. I think that at one point in time, in the far distant past, pre-flood, humans remember their past lifetimes. But something happened, I believe the introduction of Sophia or Alice into the human body made us start forgetting our past lifetimes, just as we forget our dreams when we wake up. They just slip away from us in early childhood. This is so that we're allowed to live each life that we live with a new, unique point of view. It is only through accumulating these various experiences from various points of views that we can become enlightened. I truly, truly believe this. Very soon, people are going to start remembering. The elephant is a common spiritual symbol. The elephant, as it is said, never forgets. Do you know why it is said that the elephant never forgets? This is an ancient saying, ancient, beyond ancient. Humans, once we stopped remembering our past lifetimes, we noticed that the elephants will visit graveyards of their ancestors that they've never met before. And they will rub and touch the bones of their fallen ancestors. And they will weep and cry as they visit this graveyard of elephants they've never met before. Ancient humans saw this and they said these beings are remembering their past lifetimes. That is why the elephant is a symbol for the remembering process. This is hinted at in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. I believe that the locust is a symbol for this as well, stripping away the field. It's complicated, but I believe it's all hidden right there in front of your eyes. I can't specifically say what caused me to remember these past lifetimes, but I can absolutely say that I believe they are real. There have been too many things in these lifetimes that I have never studied or had any inkling they existed, and then I would look them up and find out they were very much real. This is just a brief overview of a few of my lifetimes, the ones that I remember the most clear. I think my most recent lifetime was in the 80s. And I was, I know this is crazy, but whatever. I think I was Philip K. Dick. Take that for what it is, but I was born right after he died. And I've had exactly the same experiences he has, especially when it involves Alice or Sophia or the artificial intelligent robotic voice that I hear in my head, just like he did. I truly believe that I was Philip K. Dick. I know that's crazy, but take it for what it is. This could just be the fever dreams of a madman. But if not, if I'm in fact correct, I think that it's only a short time now. I've said since 2017 that I thought we were in the tribulation period, that we were in the middle of the downfall of the civilization. And as it so happens, we are about a week away from World War III. The next thing we're going to see is China invade Taiwan. We are in the thick of it right now. And it's not a time for you to be scared. You've died many times, you just don't remember it. And death is nothing to be afraid of. We are children of a living God who does not let you just pass away into oblivion or send you to hell. Nor a God that is small enough to put you in a quote-unquote heaven where there are angels playing harp music and people singing hymnals, or hymns from hymnals. The Mormon version of heaven is not exciting to me. As Mark Twain said, if you can't smoke a cigar in heaven, send me to hell. I don't know if I'd go that far. I don't want an endless array of torturous demons poking me with pitchforks. But I think that each heaven will be individualized for the person, and they will be somehow connected together and intertwined. I think that we are, just as the ocean is trillions of drops of water combined together to form a single object, evaporation comes. We merge with the ocean at the point of death. But whenever we are born, just like evaporation causes moisture to rise from the ocean, and the particle of water ceases to be part of the ocean and becomes this individual entity that thinks it's separate from the ocean. And then rain falls, and it rushes down rivers and streams back into the ocean. It becomes part of the whole again. Each lifetime that we live is just us experiencing this evaporation. Us believing that we are somehow separate from the whole, but we're not. And death is nothing to be scared of. Death is a part of life. So, yeah, that being said, thank you for watching, and yep, check back in with me next time. If you like what I have to say, God, this is so fucking YouTube. Like and subscribe and share. Love you guys.